Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I'm the State Section Director for MUFON Los Angeles. We have a great presentation tonight, something a lot of you have come very far to see. Bud Hopkins. Bud Hopkins is a world-renowned artist, but MUFON audiences probably know him best as a pioneer in abduction research and ufology's most visible figure. Having investigated well over 700 cases, he now heads the Intruders Foundation, a nonprofit scientific research and support organization. Hopkins' 3 books, Missing Times, Intruders, and Witnessed, are widely regarded as the most influential publications on the abduction phenomenon. His latest book, Seen, Unseen, is quickly gaining similar acclaim. Hopkins' goal has always been to bring an objective, dispassionate scientific intelligence to bear on the UFO abduction phenomenon. Virtually from the beginning of the modern era of UFO close encounters and abductions, experiencers have reported a range of dramatic and perplexing physical after effects. Hopkins asserts that though the investigators have carefully documented the emotional and psychological effects of such traumatic experiences, a more thorough study of the patterns of medical anomalies is greatly needed. Hopkins will present a number of such cases from his own files, using slides and that graphically illustrate some of these distinct types. He will offer some speculation by physicians and other medical experts as to their possible causes. According to Hopkins, a number of these anomalous after effects involve reproductive organs. He reports in 2 cases, female abductees were found to have 1 missing ovary with no apparent scar tissue to show how it was removed. Despite its controversial nature, Hopkins' research has received serious commentary in such mainstream publications as Time, The Washington Post, and the New York Times. He has been a guest on hundreds of television and radio programs including Nightline, Good Morning America, The Today Show, and Oprah Winfrey. Let's all put our hands together and give a warm welcome to Bud Hopkins.
The crowded house is a sort of an unusual phenomenon for me and quite wonderful. The last time I spoke before a really crowded house, I was giving a lecture in a 2-door Toyota Tercel, and it was no room for anybody, but the 4 people that were there really liked it. One little thing about the little statuette that was awarded a few minutes ago, the alien face, it reminds me of a cartoon I have pinned up at home of the Academy Awards ceremony. And it shows the hoopla and the dais, and the figure getting the award is standing behind the dais, and he's behind the podium, and he's a little alien with big black eyes. And as people do at the Academy Awards, he said, "First of all, I would like to thank all of you out there who believe in me," which is kind of a nice thing. Now, what I'm going to do tonight is talk about the medical issues as was explained earlier. But just before I do that, I want to go into a couple of things that have to do with issues in my book, Sight Unseen. Now, I've written 4 books in 28 years, which doesn't make me exactly prolific. But each time I've written a book, it was because there was material, there were patterns that had come to light about the abduction phenomenon that were not generally known. Right. But the point is that each time I had new material that didn't seem to be known in general, and therefore I felt I was bringing material that investigators needed to know as well as the general public. And for instance, in Missing Time, my first book, which I really wrote at the end of the 70s, it came out in 81, I discovered that people were abducted more than once. And for those of you who have a long memory, you might know that if anybody in the 60s reported 2 UFO sightings, 2 sightings, he was immediately dumped as a witness because it was believed that sightings were so rare that anybody who had 2 of them must be lying. And when we got to abductions, of course, anybody that, God forbid, reported more than 1 abduction, that was totally off the wall, and yet we found out it is the basic pattern, that people are abducted again and again. The scoop marks, the scars, elements, screen memories, elements that I had run into again and again and felt that they required more attention, were things that I brought out in these various books. And in the new book, Sight Unseen, The title, Sight Unseen, of course, is two parts. The unseen part meant that I and a number of other UFO abduction researchers have realized for a long time that when abductions take place, the whole thing can be done invisibly. It could be done in such a way that no one sees the UFO, they don't see the beam of light, they don't see the aliens or the abductee rising into a beam of light or anything like that. It just can't be seen. We don't know what the technology is, but the fact that there is a technology of invisibility seems beyond belief, and that's something I'm going to show you here, a case that bears on that subject. And there are many cases in the book which give various kinds of evidence, physical and otherwise, that supports that. The seen part has to do with the fact that there have been many cases where people have observed human-like beings, we think of the Men in Black phenomenon and so forth, who seem to be able to operate in the real world as if they're amongst us daily, driving cars, operating, having jobs, doing the kinds of things that we human beings do, as if there's a kind of slow infiltration or coexistence or whatever one wants to call it. Now, this kind of thing is really off the wall, and yet the cases were just too many over the years for me to just decide I'm not going to deal with them anymore. So I put them together in the book, and I think you'll find them excuse me, quite compelling, quite interesting, and quite disturbing. Now, I just want to say one thing about the nature of evidence. When we have UFO abductions, you may have physical marks, ground traces, the tree branches may be broken, the neighbors may see the UFO hovering above the building. You may have many, many kinds of evidence, including the emotional effects and after effects that occur with the abductees themselves and so on. These latter reports of seeing beings who seem to be not of this earth are obviously more anecdotal, and therefore we don't have the range of evidence. And I just want to say one thing in favor of anecdotal evidence. I was on a television program years ago with late Carl Sagan, and of course he said, well, all you have is anecdotal evidence. You know, he had this way of putting down anything anybody actually says, as if there's scientific evidence and then there's anecdotal. Well, the point is that all of us, day in and day out, live our lives based upon what people say to us and what we think about those things that are said to us, whether they're true or not. And the image of non-anecdotal evidence can seem to be pretty thin when you look at it objectively. And I'll give you this example, and this kind of is a prelude to everything we're going to see. Let's suppose we have a murder that takes place. A man is shot. The perpetrator, apparently, alleged, runs out. A policeman hears the shot, tackles the man, knocks him down, takes the gun from him. The gun is taken to the police station, has his fingerprints on it. The test firings are done, and they can match a bullet, which again is taken from the body of the dead man. It matches exactly. All of that is, of course, scientific evidence. But is it? What about eyewitness testimony here? This cop tackles this person, takes the gun away from him. Who says so? Well, the cop says so. Oh? Is he telling the truth? Well, you know, they took the gun away, and when they checked the bullet was taken from the body of this man and matched. Oh, it was taken from the body. Who says so? Well, it was a doctor that did a doctor did that, and the doctor claims that he took the bullet out. Well, that's what he says. That sounds like anecdotal testimony, eyewitness testimony to me, just as the cop's testimony does. And then this bullet was, the gun was tested to match the bore, the marks on the bullet. And the tester said, well, it's the same gun that fired him. Oh, is it really? The guy says so. Well, do we believe him? Now, all we have to do is to think back to the first O.J. Simpson trial to remember that people can just not believe what a cop says because that is eyewitness testimony that the cop is making. I was there, I picked up this glove, I this and that. But what if people don't believe it? In other words, at every step of the way with the case I've just mentioned, guilt depends upon guilt, meaning putting somebody to death. It depends upon our believing what somebody has said about their particular role in this incident. Eyewitness testimony, personal testimony is absolutely central to virtually everything we do. And apart from people who plead guilty in a trial, and therefore it's a closed book, apart from those people, nobody's ever been convicted without eyewitness personal testimony of some sort, from a cop, a medical examiner, or whatever, a DNA expert. Therefore, we have to be a little more respectful of what people say in terms of eyewitness testimony, personal testimony, and not just, as Carl Sagan would say, just dumping it as something that can't be dealt with. We deal with it all the time. Our lives depend on it. Now, what I want to do here, first of all, in just a minute, I want to show you a videotape, and this is an interesting case. It's one of two cases that I'm aware of where a man apparently videotaped the UFO that he was later abducted into. Sounds off the wall. The man involved, named Frank, is a corrections officer employed by the state of New York. He's a wonderful man. He's a grandfather. Very upstanding citizen, and apparently he's had a lot of very odd experiences. As we looked into it later on, apparently he's had abduction experiences. But what happened is he had his video camera in his house one day, this is back in '98, and he walked out into the garden. It was daytime. His wife was planting some plants, and he looked up and he saw this object going by, which was rather peanut-shaped, an odd shape. He ran in the house and got his video cameras right there, brought it out, and started filming this. Now, as he was telling me about it later, he said that there was a strange thing that he didn't say anything to his wife. It was 10 feet away. He didn't say, "Hey, look at that thing," the way we all would do. We'd say, "Look, do you see this?" He didn't say a word. He just got the camera and started filming it. And he watches the thing, and it goes, and I'll show you the tape, goes behind the steeple of a nearby church, and then disappears into the clouds. Well, what he did next is really interesting, and this is why, an abduction researcher naturally realizes something's up. What he did was he walked back in the house, still not saying a word to his wife. He put the camera down. He remembered going into the kitchen, and he had no more memory for the whole evening. Neither did she. No discussion. They just sort of walked in idly and sat down. It took him a full week before he began to think, didn't I videotape a UFO? And he got his camera and he viewed the tape, and there it was. Now, in actual fact, what happened when, and incidentally I should say, first of all, that the tape has been analyzed by Dr. Bruce Maccabee very thoroughly, and that's part of the story here. And it is a legitimate object, I don't know, 30 or 40 feet in diameter. They knew about the cloud cover that day, the altitude of the clouds that the object disappears into, and so forth. And Dr. Maccabee has given it the blessing that this is a legitimate object flying along. It's a very short tape. There also have been a number of other photographs taken of objects which have that same peanut shape. But what happened was, when Frank came to me, he was troubled by the fact that he let a week go by and he didn't even remember this, and his behavior was strange. We looked into this, and using hypnosis, he had been through some odd experiences which certainly suggested a pattern from his childhood on. In this experience, he went into the kitchen after he put the video camera down, went into the kitchen, and he's standing there next to the refrigerator, and all of a sudden, to his great panic, he feels himself going straight up. And he goes straight through the roof of the kitchen, and there was this thing now 30 feet or so above the roof, this huge thing. And he goes right into it. And he was absolutely terrified. he made a very interesting remark that when he went in the bottom of it, which was open, he said there were all these figures in there, sitting here and there and standing, but paying no attention to him. And his analogy was, he said, you've ever been by one of those Italian restaurants where there's a big glass wall and you can see into the kitchen and everybody's in there mixing stuff up and they're not paying any attention to the customers? He said, that's what it felt like. And actually, he was so frightened at this point in the hypnosis that we called it off. He's had a lot of other things happen. But the point here is that when this object was seen in the distance in the sky and filmed, and showed up on film, it was purely visible, no doubt about it. And his wife later said she had seen it too, even though he hadn't mentioned it to her. So here's the thing, it's visible, yet there were houses next to his, there was a road in front and so on, when this very large thing was just 30 feet above his kitchen roof, and he went straight through the roof and into it. Nobody saw it. It's as if the mechanism, the technology of invisibility could be turned on and turned off. It's a very bizarre story, and this film, I think, is interesting. So if we can have the lights and the videotape here. Now, you see the object moving along, and it disappears into the cloud cover. He'll show it again in... He was hoping it would come out the other side. You'll see it again now from another perspective. That's him walking into the house, just very casually. He didn't know why he left the camera on when he walked into the house, but we'll see the tape again. I hope that you've done this.
Approximately 8:10 a.m. I spoke to Dr. Stanton T. Friedman. He saw this videotape you're about to see, and he concluded that it was definitely a UFO. It was a daytime footage. There was structure, and also structure in the video, such as the church steeple right there, and the eaves. And the object I viewed occurred on July 2nd, Thursday, 1998, around 8 p.m. in the evening. It was still daylight, blue sky, white clouds. The cloud ceiling for that day, I found out later on, was approximately 5,000 feet. The object came from this direction, the south, towards here, the north. Actually, it was a little northeast. My name is Frank Seraniano. My wife and I both saw it. She saw it with the naked eye. I saw it with the naked eye, and that's why I ran in and got my camera. It had no wings and no sound to it. I'm going to play the tape twice at its normal speed, twice in slow motion, and twice at its normal speed again, including a jet I videotaped much higher in the sky, where you can clearly see the jet's wing structure. Let's go to the film.
Okay, now there it goes. He loses it. So you can see the peanut shape at some points. Hear the birds. And now this is a slow motion, and we'll turn this off. He's trying to find it. That's one of the signs that this is legitimate. Whenever somebody always has the object in view, you have to be worried that it's a hoax, because if it's real, you don't know where it's going to go, where it's coming from. And he loses it, but he's obviously looking for it, and there it goes. Right behind the top of that. It's a bird going by. And there it is. Okay, I think we can turn the tape off and turn the lights on again. Now there's an interesting little coda to this. When Dr. Maccabee was trying to get him to get some information so we could analyze this object in terms of its altitude and height and everything, he said, you have to go to the church and find out how tall the steeple is. And Frank is a kind of lapsed Catholic, and he felt kind of funny doing that. And so Bruce said, no, you just have to go in there, just ask the priest, you know. And of course, my guess is no priest would necessarily know exactly how tall the steeple was, but they were hoping. So he said, Frank told me he went in there, and there was this, he thought, very overweight priest who he took a dislike to right away, sitting behind an extremely ornate desk. And when he asked him the height of the steeple, of course, the priest said, why do you have to know that? And he said, well, I just have to know. And finally hemmed and hawed, and the priest wanted to know. So finally he said, well, I filmed a UFO passing behind the steeple, and the person doing the analysis wants to know how high the steeple is to get his calculations in order. And the priest threw back his head and roared and laughed. And he said, surely you don't believe in things like UFOs. And Frank said, well, yes, I do. He said, I take it you believe in God and Jesus and Mary? And the priest said, of course. And Frank said, you got any pictures? I got pictures. So now, if we can have the slides, we'll turn this off, the projector, and we're going to look at some slides. We're going to move on to the medical area. Now, again, in terms of what I was saying about anecdotal evidence not being something we should shun. In this particular case, a woman from Staten Island I worked with back in, 20 years ago, remembered being taken into a craft, and she said there was another person on a table, a man, and she said this object at the left, this machine-like thing, came down, it was telescoped, and she saw it go into the corner of the eye of the man. And she said the man was quivering, though he apparently couldn't move, and she said it was extremely upsetting to her. Now, we have many cases where this may be an implant, and I'm going to show you some x-rays of implants. This may be a situation where some kind of an object is being placed inside the skull through the opening of the eye socket. We don't really know. We have the physical evidence, but we don't have the rationale in any absolute way. But what's interesting about this eye thing, which we get again and again, is that in another case, a little boy who was about 5, who was having these funny experiences, and I've interviewed the little boy, he said that he was in this white thing. They took him into the ship, and there was a big figure, but not big, but a figure standing there with huge eyes. And because he drew the figure from the profile, he only put one eye in. And there was another little boy in the neighborhood who was on the table who was shaking, and the man was putting something in this little boy's eye, corner of the eye. And this child was, who saw this, was extremely frightened for a long time. Now, what's interesting to me is when you get something unusual, and at the time this idea of something going into the eye, some medical procedure, quasi-medical procedure, well, that's rare enough to start with. When you get a little child describing the same thing out of left field, when you imagine a child's imagination could be remembering anything, you have a piece of evidence here that's quite important. Now, just one other thing before we get into the straight medical thing. This is a drawing made from a woman in Texas, and of course what's very interesting is it's a composite drawing. For our purposes here is the little fetus-like thing which she draws in front, but she sees him in some kind of a tank, some kind of a floating tank. This is something, of course, that for those of you familiar with this, we get again and again and again. And this is another drawing by another person. I have a number of drawings of these huge-headed little fetuses, which may be part human, part alien. We don't know what they are exactly, but floating in tanks. And one of the things that we go into in Sight Unseen is the fact that recently in Japan, scientists have been working with an artificial womb to use with animals. And they can keep fetal animals alive for long periods of time by floating them in some kind of a tank with the nutrients that they need for development. In other words, our science is beginning to creep over into this area. But these tiny little babies, which all have the same feature of a huge head and a very tiny body. The body is never seen curled up in the fetal position that we associate with a newborn. This is one drawing of a man who was presented, an abductee, with this tiny thing and asked to hold it and was made to feel that he was the putative father, which he didn't accept. That's one drawing. Here's another drawing made by a woman who was given the same kind of a thing. So again, in terms of this sort of evidence that we get again and again, okay, we're going to move into something different here. But when you get this evidence again and again, anecdotal evidence, quote unquote, but the repetitions are exact. And what you get in these repetitions is a series of things that never turn up. For instance, no abductees that I know of have ever reported any alien interest in the human heart. All of us, when we go to a doctor, especially people my age, you worry about your heart and your cardiovascular system, and you worry about cholesterol and everything else. So if this is imagination, we would imagine ourselves taking alien EKGs and so forth. Never hear about it. There are a whole series of things that one would expect if this were simply imagination. And what instead we get are things like the things I've been showing you, patterns which seem to be very unique to the UFO phenomenon itself. Now we're getting into just physical traces after abductions. One of the most interesting early cases, a 1967 case, was a man named Michalek in Canada, who actually got too close to a UFO on the ground in the daytime and was hit by some kind of beam of light which left a series of very regularly spaced burn marks down his chest. This was taken when he was in the hospital. And these are quite painful. Nobody knew exactly what happened. Whether there was an abduction involved, we don't really know. In 1967, nobody would have thought so. But the idea of a regular grid of marks is something that does turn up from time to time, and it has something very different than the way most of us get marks on our body just by accident. This is a set of marks on a woman's hip, and this woman was abducted in Costa Rica. Now, these marks were small in an area several inches across. Her husband saw them when she was in the shower after an abduction which had happened. They didn't hurt, they didn't burn, they were not puncture marks. We don't know what they were for. And as I've said before, someone once said to me, oh, the people interested in this, it's just a cult. And I said, well, it's very interesting because this is the opposite of a cult. I said, a cult like the Moonies or whatever are all beliefs and no miracles. And I said, we're all miracles and no beliefs because we don't know what these things are for. Now, to get into very quickly, we'll run through the scoop marks, which I'm sure many of you have seen. These are two on the leg of Kathy Davis. This is when people are abducted, and this can happen in childhood or later. It can happen more than once to the same person. And what that person gets is, after an abduction experience, is as if a little ladle-like instrument has removed a layer of cells. And we don't know what this is for. I'll talk a little bit about it in a minute. But just to give you an idea of what these things look like. This is a 5-year-old boy. This turned up virtually overnight and was documented actually by his pediatrician, who didn't know what caused it. This is one that's in the process of healing. Now these happen to be on the front of the lower leg, which is common, but they're all over the place. I've seen a very bad one on someone's face. Here's another. This is what they look like in relief, so you can see this has been on this woman's leg for something like 40 years. It's as if they need to take a layer of flesh, for whatever medical purposes, but it's a physical act, and this is a physical after effect which turns up again and again. Another one, small, a little harder to see. Just go through some of these. The one at the top is a very large one on a man's, this is a man from Turkey. He has one on his right thigh and another exactly matching in the same place on his left thigh, dating from his teenage years. Here's a close-up of what some of these look like in different cases. Now, one doctor I've discussed this with said they look like the kinds of scars you get from punch biopsies. But we don't know why the aliens do this, but they seem to need this piece of flesh from people. Now, there are many abductees apparently that don't have these marks, but I've seen certainly well over 100 of them. This is an Australian case, and this is a little different because it's got a kind of puckered depth at the top end, and then it goes off into a straight line cut. She's had this from when she was an infant. This is what it looks like up close. This is a man who has this big scar and moving into straight line cuts, which we get from when he was 10 years old. Every one of these has a long, complex story, which I'm not going to get into right now. I just want you to see a range of the physical marks. But notice it's on the right side of his back. This is what it looks like up close. He's African American, and apparently his skin develops keloid scar tissue fairly easily. It's a long, very bad scar. Very interesting story behind it. In this case, in that bruise, and this was taken 2 days after the abduction, the woman has, it's a little hard to see in the slide, a very slender straight line cut that's perhaps 3 inches long. And when she went to the doctor and he looked at it, he said, "What kind of surgery did you have?" "That's a surgical cut." And she said, "I didn't have any, I just woke up and that's where it was." She had some memories of hands pushing her down, being on the floor. There were a whole lot of issues like that. But in most of these cases, not every one, but most of them, there's never any blood. No blood stains afterwards. It'd be nice if we had some of these same methods of stopping bleeding. Now, another pattern, a subgroup, is right in the very top of the head. People have reported a little cut. We don't know, again, as I say, we don't know why these things are done, but they're not uncommon. That's one case. It's another case, a little harder to see. A straight line cut right at the very apex of the body. Here's another one. So there are classes here. We don't get, what don't we get? We don't get ragged, jagged things that look like something was torn and ripped. We don't get something that looks like it could have been done by an angry cat or anything like that. We're getting very clear, precise things located in specific places. And for those of you who are familiar with the Kelly Cahill case in Australia, which is extremely interesting, 3 different automobiles were stopped late at night. The people in Australia, the people in the cars, there was a single man in one car and 2 people in the other 2. All 5 found themselves getting out of the car and walking into a field towards this landed UFO. Apparently when notes were compared later on, there was an article in the paper, and one of the people who hadn't come forward at the time came forward later. Every one of them had these marks around the ankles, both ankles, all 5 people in the same place, which would suggest, of course, some kind of shackling or whatever. And that, again, is very, very rare, but we do have a subgroup of this sort of mark, too. This is hard for me to see from here. These are, I'm sure they're hard for you to see. They're straight line cuts straight across a man's back, a few diagonals, but most of them are perfectly horizontal, and they're totally symmetrical to the spine. And one of the other things, of course, that I've mentioned before that the aliens seem interested in is the human nervous system, and the spine seems to be an important thing. These were on his, I photographed this badly, I have to say, when he was in his 40s, and he noticed them first when he was 10. Now, another kind of odd thing is this sort of oval mark, like a donut shape, on a woman's shoulder. This is after an abduction. And nobody understood what this was for. These are just the anomalies. That was on one shoulder, and this was on the other shoulder. She had a matching set right up here. Again, we don't know what that's for. They were not painful. There was nothing injurious in any sense, and they faded after a while. Now, the straight line cuts often turn up on people. This was a Native American woman, and this was after an abduction. And this thing, as you can see, is quite long. It's on her shin. These leave a scar, but they don't leave a scoop mark. There are various different projects, apparently, that the UFO occupants are interested in, which require different kinds of sampling procedures. We don't know why or how, but this is very typical. This is one on the back of the leg, and this is one that the case that I wrote about in The Missing Time in my first book, when this girl was 14, 15, something like that, on a family picnic in Europe. And she disappeared in the woods, and people were looking for her for a long, long time, calling and so forth, very worried. And she came walking out of the woods with this cut on her leg, having no idea where she'd been. But she remembered that she'd been talking to this deer that was the most beautiful deer she'd ever seen, because it had these big black eyes, and it was standing right next to her, talking to her telepathically. And it was one of the early cases where the screen memory image came up, that somehow the aliens put an image in a person's mind to cover the problems that that person might have if, in fact, they remembered consciously exactly what they were looking at. And I might have mentioned before, or you might have heard me say this, the one kind of amusing one was a woman who apparently had had a number of abduction experiences, though she didn't want to think so or face them or anything. And her cousin, who was had his own abduction experiences, was talking to her one day, and she lived in the country, and she said she was driving home, and she said this. It's amazing. She said this cow came over and was looking in the window of her car, and the cow had these big soulful eyes, and it was just staring right through the window of the car for quite a few minutes. And she said the strange thing was she was going about 45 miles an hour. So he said, well, it must have been a thoroughbred cow. That was, but there are all of these images which somehow get slipped into our recollections, and when actually what we might be remembering might be disturbing. This is on the knee. It's a very small cut, but this woman has had many experiences, and this was recalled at the time of an abduction, which she remembered pieces of it consciously. I'm only just showing you these because they're so common. Now, when we get into the issue of, and we'll talk about what some of these things may mean, but when we get into the issue of the whole business of implants, which of course is a very controversial thing, I just want to start, but this is an object in the nasal cavity of Linda Cortila. You can see it better here. She remembered the thing going into her, being put into her nose on a long pointed object, but she thought it was a little ball, and it hurt, and she ended up not remembering that consciously. She remembered it later, but she went to a doctor about it, and because there was a bump on the other side of her nose, and she was afraid she might have some disease. And of course the doctor asked her what kind of surgery she'd had, and she said she'd never had surgery. But the interesting thing was, this was many years after the incident, when she came to me to talk about this, she still had the receipt that she'd gotten from the doctor for paying him for the examination, something like 10 or 12 years earlier, as if it's the kind of thing we all throw away after a while. You don't hang on to that. But it was as if she knew that there was something very uncanny and upsetting about this mark. And of course, for those of you who are familiar with the case and familiar with witnessed my account of it, what happened is shortly after the x-ray was taken, she was re-abducted and woke up bleeding from that nostril, and she had a cut there but no object, as if it had been removed. But I want to just tell you the kind of story that often comes along with this. A woman I worked with in Salt Lake City, it was interesting because she said to me, she said, "Bud, who are these people, these beings? Where do they come from?" She said, "I have my God." She said, "I'm a Mormon. I have my God. I don't know what this is and how it confuses my beliefs. Where are these people from? How do they relate to my God?" At any rate, this woman who had had a lot of experiences that were odd, and people who've had these experiences often find ways, amazing ways, to sort of put them aside and say there's nothing to them. It must have been this, it must have been that, I must have had a funny dream, or I'm just a little crazy, or something. I'm always amazed at how people can somehow forget these things and just put them aside. But at any rate, she had had an experience driving home from a family party with her son, who was 16. The car was stopped. This is all conscious memory. The car suddenly stopped. It was surrounded by light. She was paralyzed. He was paralyzed. They didn't know what was happening. And then all of us, she had a vague feeling of figures around the car. The next thing she was conscious of, the light's gone, everything's normal. The car starts up, and she's too upset to drive, and she has her son drive home. But what happened a couple of years later was that she had an accident. She was minding somebody's big German Shepherd, and the dog jumped up on her and knocked her back against a brick wall and knocked her unconscious. And when she came to, she called 911. She was on the floor and bleeding, and she was afraid, she was afraid she'd fractured her skull. She went to the doctor, and she had x-rays. And she said she didn't have a fractured skull, but she said the x-ray, the radiologist came running down the hall waving the x-rays and said, "How did you get a little piece of metal in your head?" And this is his report on it. This is just worth mentioning. It's a such and such a hospital, radiology consultation form, skull series, fell and hit head. These views include brow up lateral views, AP, and town films. Examination demonstrates an oval metallic density in the projected position of the brain of the right parasagittal area. This appearance is unusual for an artifact, and certainly the pattern would be worthy of pursuit. Study of the bony calvarium and scalp shows no evidence of abnormality of the scalp mantle. There was no broken place of scar for this. Impressions: 1, RO, metal density, foreign body, right prestigital brain as noted above. 2, no fractured abnormality is seen, and it's signed. Now I have a number of these. We talk a lot about removal of implants, and of course implants have been, alleged implants have been removed. Dr. Roger Lear, a colleague of mine, has removed things from a hand or a foot. But when you get something that's deep in the brain that couldn't have gotten there by any method that we can understand, you have a real problem. And this seems to be, although in the case of Linda Cortilo, this thing was, of course, not in any hard-to-get-to place. Now I'll show you another x-ray of a little girl. The background of this is that this little girl was 5 years old. She was reporting little people in the room, was terrified to go to sleep at night, etc., etc. Her mother was having experiences. They were living in Europe, in Germany. Her father was in the army. They took a vacation to Italy, and she had an accident on her bicycle and fell off, and they took her to the hospital. I think it was in Milan or someplace. I have the report in Italian. And they x-rayed her and found this object. Now I'll show you, I have to point it out. In this photograph, x-ray, it's taken from this angle. It's taken from up above. They obviously do these from different positions. Now, this one, oh, I'm sorry, on its side, was taken from down below, looking up. And the object is in the eye, it looks like it's in the eye socket from this angle. So depending upon the angle at which the X-ray was taken and the position of her head, it looks like it's in two different places, but it actually is in exactly the same place. And when you see it from the side, you see exactly where it is. Now, what happened, as what happened with Linda Cortila, once the X-rays were taken, the vacation ended. They went back to Wiesbaden, where he was stationed, and she was re-X-rayed by the Army doctor, and it wasn't there. It's as if somehow or other these things can alert the authorities, and they're removed. Now, I want to say first and foremost, we do not know what these things are, and we don't know what the purpose is. People immediately jumped at this at the very beginning when they were discussed, really back in the 70s, that these things must be locator transmitters, because we were busy clipping little transmitters on polar bear ears and that kind of thing. So we assume that's what it is. But of course, I don't think that that's necessary to the aliens granted their technology to locate us. I think that can be done without these things. We don't know whether it's a monitoring of something, and they could be monitoring something which we are not even aware of as a human quality. Just as if somebody could go back to the 12th century and look for a particular blood type, and everybody in the 12th century would say, well, what do you mean? Blood is blood. But we now know there are different types and they have different qualities. So there may be something that they're interested in that we don't even know about, which makes the whole thing very difficult. I'll show you a few more things here. This is another letter. This is the one that I just read to you. This is yet another letter on another one of these. I'm not going to labor these. Now, if I could have a little light here, I'm going to turn off the slides. If I can have a little light so I can see what I'm doing here on me. Is it possible? Oh, okay. I want to, no, I can do it with this. This is okay. I just want to go into now some of the more peculiar medical issues. What I was showing you here mainly are photographs of the after effects of some kinds of procedures which we do not understand the purpose of. Now, a man wrote me a number of years ago, a man in his 40s, a very, very bright man in the world of theater. And he told me some of his experiences, which were extremely upsetting to him. Missing time experiences. I'll just read you one to give you an idea. When my my grandmother took my sister and me to see Pinocchio one night. Now, very little, obviously. The drive home after was eerie and sticks in my mind. Years later, when my sister and I both mentioned we'd never seen Pinocchio, our mother contradicted us and said grandmother had taken us. She remembered because we got back very late. I still can't remember seeing the movie, but have memories of the creepy, never-ending drive home. Now, these are just the little subtle things that he remembered. There's a whole series of things. Now, this is where it gets into a big problem, because you imagine that, because I can't have time to go into it, these various experiences that he's remembered in a partial way. He said in February of 1965, about a month after my missing time episode, a different one, my right testicle shrunk to the size of a pea. I went to several doctors about the condition, which puzzled me and apparently puzzled them. They noted the small size of my right testicle, and because testicles don't just shrink without a notable incident or amount of pain, they dismissed the condition and the problem. They said it didn't exist. Shut up, he explained. 5 different urologists he went to gave the same opinion. At first, I suspected some AIDS-related disease or condition, in spite of the fact that I was and remained HIV negative, am not promiscuous and practice safe sex. That fall, I began graduate school. Because the condition of his right testicle was affecting my work in a negative way, I began seeing a therapist. After 4 frustrating months, the therapist conducted a simple test that proved the testicle had died. A quick phone call changed my urologist's opinion overnight, and I was rushed into surgery. I should note that the urologist did not do this test because they thought without pain or an incident there was no problem. My therapist, who was also an MD, is a rather famous individual associated with Yale University. The testicle was found dead and removed. No cause could be determined. Later, a recurring infection was detected in my urine, and still later I required surgery to remove growths in my urethra. Now, the point is that when you discuss this with, I know this is on the grim side, but when you discuss this kind of situation with urologists, the only way a testicle can atrophy like that is if something cuts off the blood supply. There's some kind of constriction, and then it's severely painful. And this happened to him in just a few weeks. Now, he's had one thing after another, but of course this was the most alarming thing that had happened. What I've found is a man came to me once on Cape Cod with his wife, and she had remembered some UFO experiences which she didn't want to go into. She was just adamant that this was extremely upsetting and she did not want to deal with it. But what happened is she had had a baby through cesarean section, and everything was fine. And she had a second child a few years later and went back to the same doctor. And after the operation, the doctor said, "What happened to your right ovary?" And she said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, you don't have one. When was it removed?" He said, "You had one when you had the first baby. Everything was normal." She was, she just argued with him. She said it was impossible. It cannot be, that cannot have happened. She did not want to look into it, yet she was having a number of experiences. And I'm going to go into a little bit about some of these problems that have led women to have hysterectomies when they're 22 and 26, all kinds of problems. And in one of the cases we have documented very carefully when one of the ovaries was removed, it was covered with scar tissue, as if it had been punctured many, many times. And the doctors did not know what caused this. The account is laid out in a very medical fashion. This is another letter. Excuse me. I'm mixing up this other case. This is a case from New Jersey that I'm about to look into, where again exactly the same thing happened. A woman had a cesarean child, and then through cesarean had another child, and again the doctor asked, "What happened to your one of your ovaries?" There was no scar tissue that suggested how it had been removed. It just wasn't there. We have no way of knowing how these things happen, but you have to realize one thing. Even though there are these cases of a needle going in the nostril or into the corner of the eye or into the ear, how these objects may get removed, is there some technology that dissolves them so they're just gone? If aliens can pass through walls and things like this that seem, of course, totally impossible to us, can an ovary, an organ, be removed from the body without leaving a scar? There are many, many things that we don't know, but there seems to be an intense interest in the reproductive system. And right now, I'm working with a man who when he was born and became a young child, there was a case of an undescended testicle. And yet when he was operated on to bring it down, it didn't exist. I'm now in the process, this is something I'm just working on, to find out from urologists how many times someone is born totally with one testicle instead of two. The undescended testicle is very common. But if they're interested in sperm and ova sampling, why not take the factory that makes these things if they want to do it? That we don't know. But now I'll read you another letter which is in another area of problems. health problems. This is a young man in Virginia who contacted Sue Swiatek. I'm sure some of you know him. She's with MUFON in the Washington area. He said he wanted to talk about a weird experience. He went on to say, I was on the table. This is his memory. And 3 people were standing looking over me. There was a machine stretched over me about halfway down my chest, across the top of my stomach. A series of bright flashes were coming out of the machine. I only felt a slight warm sensation across my chest and the top of my stomach. To be honest, it felt actually good. Then one, he said, I will say person, looked down at me and just said, I'm so sorry, but we hurt you. I could not respond at all or move. Then, to be honest, they looked at as if they were puzzled and at the same time hurt that I was so hurt. Then very softly, I guess spoke, although he's not sure whether it was telepathic, and told me, we will always try to help you and we will never forget you. In subsequent conversations, this witness clarified the expression, one, I will say person, looked down at me, to mean that the beings looked down on him could not easily pass for ordinary people. They were of normal human height but had extremely olive-colored skin, long blonde hair, and ice blue eyes. He also clarified the expression, then very softly, I guess, spoke and told me by saying the beings didn't really speak per se. It was all telepathic. 2 weeks later, he was in the hospital with sharp chest pains. Fluid was gathering around his heart and putting pressure on a valve. The fluid had drained from his lungs, which had been recently severely traumatized. He had a chest x-ray on file at the hospital the previous year, and there was no lung damage. Now his lungs showed severe sudden burning. The doctors kept asking him if he had inhaled a caustic chemical or had inhaled hot fumes from a fire. He said no. This young man had this experience in March 2000 when he was 30 years old. He has the lungs of a very old man. Now at 33, he is on oxygen at night and has been told that he needs to think quickly about a double lung transplant. His doctors, located in a relatively small town, wanted him to see the top people at the University of Virginia Medical School. He went there on Thursday, November. He called me to tell me that these new doctors were very curious and kept asking him if he'd been near radiation, if he had access to uranium. He kept saying no. They were of the mindset that his injuries were not even consistent with the inhalation of a chemical. They said the top of his lungs were burned so badly they are blistered, and the rest of his damage is so symmetrical that it looks artificial or mechanically induced. Inhalation damages would not be so pristinely symmetrical. They speculated upon radiation or microwave-like cooking of his lungs from the inside out. Their many inquiries about uranium made him very nervous, and in these tense times made him feel intimidated that they might paint him as some kind of terrorist. They recommended a double lung transplant sooner than later. Now, I have to say, first of all, to reassure everybody, this is the only case I've ever heard like this. These things don't happen. I've worked with hundreds of abductees, most all of whom the worst they can report is a scoop mark or something like that, apart from whatever emotional turmoil that the experiences might engender. Something like this is very, very rare. But in fact, it seems that some kind of experiment or something was being done that went wrong. And the man, I've talked to him at length. I'm going to be seeing him later this winter. Cannot work. He's on disability. He's 33. And nobody can figure out what's happened to his lungs. Now, one last area that I want to mention has to do with vision. And Kathy Davis, Debbie told me, who I wrote about in Intruders, when she had her experience in 1983, in the Minneapolis area, Indianapolis area, she found afterwards that, because there was this gigantic flash as part of the experience, that her eyesight was damaged. Her eyes were swollen. She went to a doctor as if she had conjunctivitis or something like this. They couldn't figure out what it is. She's recently had surgery on her eyes, and she's just turned 50. And the doctors keep asking if she'd been subject to very bright light or staring at welders' torches or something of that sort, that this is very unusual as far as they're concerned, and her eyesight has been a major problem. I got a letter from another man recently. He said, it's a long letter detailing his experiences. He said, 1981, I lost my sight. I had cataracts that started in the middle of the eye. It was explained at the time that this was very, very rare. Usually cataracts start at the corner, and sight is diminished very gradually as the cataract spreads. I lost my sight completely in 2 months. The odds of this type of cataract are against this type of cataract are very high. To increase the odds, it happened to me in both eyes at exactly the same time at an early age. I was 46 at the time. Odds are in the millions, the doctor told me. He said I must have been exposed to a massive dose of ultraviolet light, which of course I knew did not happen. Now this is coming out of one of his experiences. Now we can be enormously thankful that in most abduction experiences, of which there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands, we don't have any kind of medical damage such as this. And I've heard people who have wanted to say that they had energy problems and problems of sleeplessness and lack of ability to work and so forth, which may be, of course, psychological, connected with the experiences, but I don't think that it's something that is a natural result of the abduction experience. And some people bounce through these experiences and come through them, even though there's a lot of emotional turmoil and self-doubt and everything else, they come through them fine. But we do have these areas where something is happening that should not happen. I mean, where there's just a sense here of damage that should not be done. And it certainly seems to me that despite the UFO occupants' concentration on the whole process of reproduction and trying to create hybrid beings, they're not really hybrids, transgenic beings that participate in human and alien characteristics. That seems to be central, but there seem to be also some kinds of experiments that are going on in other areas. We have no idea what their purposes are, and as I say, this taking of flesh, we have no idea what they do with it and why they need it. It's a very interesting thing that Betty Hill, in a very early case, described them scraping her arm in the craft and flaking off bits of dry skin. Many people have reported that. Linda Cortila said that, didn't know what it was. She said it was like a slightly sharp butter knife that was scraping her arm, and they were collecting the samples of skin. Well, of course, what's happening now in our DNA genetic research labs is that we're doing exactly the same thing. We are scraping people's arms, removing that loose skin, and of course, all kinds of DNA material, the genetic makeup and so on, could be found in those skin samples. Why do they need to take these big hunks of skin from people? And just to give an example of how large this can be, I was in England, and incidentally, I hardly recommend the fact that you're thinking of inviting Nick Pope over. He's a wonderful guy and a very good researcher, and we've worked together a lot. And if you have any trouble getting him or paying for it, maybe you could just pay me to go see him over there, because I always like to go to England. But the thing is that when I was over in England at one conference once, a woman who was in her 60s, who was the wife of a police inspector, came up to me, and she had remembered a lot about her at least one UFO abduction. And she said, you know, Bud, you showed these pictures of these scoop marks. She said, I had one of those things on my thigh. And she hiked up her dress, and there on the side of her leg was one, well, in my memory, it looked as big as a quarter. It was probably not that big, but it was big, and it was deep. And I said, oh, that's really, you know, that's a bad scar. I said, how did you get that? And she said, well, it's not a UFO connected. She said, I remember how I got it. She said, I was out in the garden gardening, and an earwig ran up my leg and bit me. Now, if you know what an earwig is, it's a beetle-like thing, and it has pinchers on the back, you know. So I said, oh, well, I didn't know earwigs bit people. And she said, well, I didn't either. And I said, must have hurt. She said, oh, no, it wasn't any pain. I said, oh, no pain? I mean, you've had that thing for a long time. She said, oh, no, no pain. I said, well, it must have bled badly. She said, didn't bleed at all. I said, did you kill the earwig? And she said, well, I don't really remember seeing the earwig. And then she said, you know, I think this isn't making sense. And I said, you're sure right about that. And of course, that is one of the signs that, you know, any investigator in this area looks for, is when the person realizes eventually that their own behavior, like Frank not looking at his videotape after he's filmed a UFO for a week, not remembering it. That's just, there's something wrong with that. And what that usually indicates is, of course, some kind of control over memory, recollection on the part of the aliens. And the person takes a long time to realize, you know, that's the strangest, I don't know why I did that. I had a case once where a man was telling me that he'd had a number of experiences. He lived in a dormitory, not a dormitory, it was an apartment building, or it was a big mansion been turned into apartments for students in Pittsburgh. And he woke up one night and he had all kinds of experiences, and a cut on his leg and from one of these and so on. I talked to his mother about part of it. But at any rate, he said he woke up in his room by himself and he couldn't move, he was paralyzed, the room was filled with light, there was a figure there, and he was absolutely terrified, and then suddenly he could move, and there was no figure and no light. But, as is typical, he didn't see anybody leave. Now, you know, if something like that's going on, you're going to watch it. I didn't remember anything leaving. But he said, you know, but I was so frightened that I got up, and he said it was, say, 3 in the morning, and I got dressed, and I went outside to take a walk. And I said, well, I said, was there an all-night delicatessen or someplace you could go and talk to some people? He said, no, I walked up into on the hill and into the woods. I said, you mean you were scared and you got dressed and left the house and you walked up the hill into the woods? I had been to where he walked. I don't even like to walk there in the daytime. And I said, well, why didn't you knock on the door of somebody down the hall, some friend, and say, you know, I need some company here or something? He said, oh, no, I just had to get out of the house. I went up the hill. And I said, do you do that often? He said, oh, yeah. I said, well, like, did you do it once a month? He said, no. I said, once a year? He said, no. He said, I think that's the only time I ever did it. When he's terrified. And at that point, he began to put 2 and 2 together and realized that he had lived with this explanation of his own behavior, which made absolutely no sense. And I was just dealing with somebody who was telling me that he was in his house. This is about 3 months ago. His wife was in the hot tub on the deck in the back, and she yelled to him there was a helicopter outside. And so he ran outside, and he said right over the trees, and it's about 100 feet from the deck, was this object with 3 huge panels of light. And it was so bright that he couldn't quite make out the shape of the object. Totally soundless. And they're looking at it, and he got his camera was right nearby. He got his camera, and he said as he raised the camera, the thing dropped down behind the trees, right behind his backyard. And he was disappointed that he didn't get a picture. I said, well, what did you do then? Well, I guess I went in the house. I said, what did your wife do? Well, I guess she got out of the tub and came into the house too. I said, did you talk about it? He said, I don't remember anything for several hours after that happened. And at that point, it began to dawn on them that this isn't making sense either. And of course, as I say, this is a kind of a marker. Now, to get back to the physical side of this, one of the most perplexing things about the whole UFO phenomenon to almost everybody, regardless of their position, is that it is absolutely, totally in some areas, physical. They cut your leg. They take a hunk of flesh. They leave a cut on you. They break the tree branches, etc. They leave marks on the ground. They bake the soil. They ruin somebody's lungs. It's physical. Yet, the communication is telepathic. They can go through walls. They can be invisible. And those who would like to look at this as a nuts and bolts thing are always troubled by invisibility. How the heck do they do that? Going through a wall? Going up a beam of light? How do they do those things? The nuts and bolts people don't like the fact that this entire paranormal side of it, traditionally paranormal. I always think of paranormal as a technology we don't yet understand. But the point is, it's a bothersome thing to nuts and boltsers, who I think are pretty much gone. But then you have people who want to believe the best of this, or maybe they have a sort of quasi-religious hope about it. They don't like the fact that people get cut, or people get hurt, or there's a physical side. So we have to take this phenomenon in all its complexity, with all of its different areas, which don't seem to make sense. If they can remove something from the inside of somebody's head or an ovary without leaving a mark, why did they leave these marks? I have no idea. Why, if something can be seen some of the time, can it not be seen other times? Why aren't they invisible all the time? There are all of these questions which only make the whole thing, to me, in a strange way, more believable, because it seems so mixed between magic, our way of thinking about it, and technology. It's such a weird amalgam that nobody would make this up. You would deal with one thing or another. If you want to talk about a guardian angel coming down, you can talk about it in wonderful terms, and you can describe what happens and how good it feels and everything, but you don't have to mention one single physical thing. The physicality is out. But we don't have that luxury here. We have a physical side of this, which has its bad side, actually. Now, just to clarify that, and in just a minute, I'm going to wind this up, because I know that you'll have a lot of questions, and I hope so, and I'd like to have plenty of time to talk about it. But just in the sense of a vision of this, I've fought for this all my life. This does not reduce itself to a friendly, benign, helpful, loving phenomenon, nor does it reduce itself to some evil, demonic, here to hurt us and swoop down our supermarkets or whatever. It is neither one of those things, which makes it, again to me, even more believable. Because if it were all good or all bad, it would be fitting our stereotypes. We need it to be good or bad, but it isn't. It has this strange mix. And because it has a strange mix, as far as I'm concerned, it seems to be something that's outside the imagination of most of the people who have these experiences. People who will say to me, I don't know what they were doing. I don't know why they did these things to me. They didn't tell me. I don't understand it. But they brought me back, and they calmed me down and put me in bed or back in the car, wherever it was. So they're not cosmic stormtroopers, but they're not here to help us in any obvious way. Obviously, these experiences have gone on through the 40s, and as far as I know, there wasn't a single Jewish baby saved during the Holocaust. We have now diseases, AIDS, and new diseases that haven't been cured. It isn't as if there's some sign that we've been helped tremendously. It's as if they're doing things their way, according to their agenda, trying to, it would seem, to do it with as little of an impact on our lives as possible. This poor man with the lungs, they were telling him, we're sorry, Now, this is an unusual case, and please don't go home wheezing and thinking something terrible is, these things don't happen. It's one reason why I'm very hesitant to talk about these medical situations. But anybody who has any interest as a physician or psychiatrist or psychotherapist, this field is so available for study And this is what we need. We need that kind of support. So at any rate, at that point, what I'd like to do is end this now, and any questions that anybody has, I would like to take. If we can have the lights on? Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
In the quest for physical evidence, skeptics may look at the scoop marks, scratches, and scars and say, well, those could be self-inflicted or accidents or injuries. But it would seem that the implants, which are tangible themselves, would be the priority as far as physical evidence. What is the progress with that research?
Well, progress is spotty in all of these areas. We get asked this, and of course, what do you say? We're all doing this on our own. We're all doing it out of our own pockets, more or less. There is no real money behind this. Incidentally, I saw the movie Sideline. I saw the movie Kinsey. I hope other people have seen that movie. And it's a wonderful movie. But by the end of Kinsey, I was extraordinarily moved by the similarity of what he went through and the disdain that he was suffering, the lack of support, and so on, about something that everyone should have been interested in, which is human sexuality. When you see that movie, you'll know what it's like to be in our position. So I think that we need a tremendous amount of work. And what happens, of course, is in some of these early cases, with the woman, I read from Salt Lake City, I read the doctor's report, the radiologist's report about this object. We were able to get the x-rays in microfilm about this big, and it was impossible to see anything. I mean, the resolution was dropped, So these things often are too late for us to get to. We're trying to get to them more quickly. But one thing about the scoop marks is that doctors who've looked at these things are really quite taken, because they seem very odd and very similar. And they're more evidence than, doctors have been quite stunned and we've actually done some x-rays to see if there's anything down underneath, which there isn't. But we just need, we need a lot of scientists with a lot of experience and a lot of equipment to join this, and we might have some answers. Yeah. Question?
Yeah, in your research, have you ever heard of people describing aliens in a bird man-like or lion man-like fashion as far as the face goes?
Well, one of the things, of course, when you say what a person describes is you want to know whether you're dealing with a screen memory or what. You're not necessarily sure you're dealing with an actual memory. Some of these more odd descriptions begin to change when you look into them under hypnosis. Hypnosis can get back to the experience in a general sense, and it can make some of those things change. So if somebody comes in and says, I saw an alien with a bird's nest on his head and this and that, I'm not so sure that that's unless you can look into the cases in some depth, you're not sure what people actually saw. But it's a good question.
My question is kind of a follow-up to that one. I've been studying the crossover fields of alien abductees who are also reporting military abductions and satanic ritual abuse experiences, which both cases offer physical evidence sometimes and medical evidence sometimes. Have you had any cases where there's been crossover into either of those fields with evidence to go with it?
Well, first of all, the satanic abuse phenomenon, I have to say I'm pretty skeptical about. Afshi and other people, I think, have done a pretty good job of knocking some of those cases apart. So I'm not a partisan of that. I remember a woman who was a psychiatrist saying to me once, I have dozens of satanic abuse people. They all come in, and it's all the same kind of thing that you're reporting. And I said, well, the reason I don't accept satanic abuse and cults is that we know one thing: the press is very active. They infiltrate the mafia. They can infiltrate even the CIA. The press can get in there and find out certain things if they're working at it. Certainly the Ku Klux Klan, an organization, had been infiltrated, but I've never heard of a single solitary case where a bona fide reporter was able to find out anything. And when I was telling this woman trying to make this point, she said, "But you know why that's the case?" She said, "It's because the entire press are satanic worshipers." And I said, I always thought Barbara Walters was satanic, but I'm not sure about the others. So I really have a dim view of those reports. There might be some, there's some cults in New York that slaughter chickens or something, but the basic, she did such a dramatic job using the same method I use, which is false leads, and trapped some people, witnesses, very badly. Now, in terms of the military, this is another subject. And again, we have problems getting through to it. I have an open mind on that. I have one case where it would certainly seem somebody was abducted by a military group, not pretending to be aliens or cooperating, but just on their own to get what they could from her, including apparently an implant. It's a pretty good case, I have to say. And obviously, if there is a government cover-up, which I absolutely believe there is, they're bound to do things like that. They're bound to kind of chase around and try to find out something. But the idea, if we're dealing with, as I believe, possibly millions of abductees, the number of people who are going to be dealing with some sort of government curiosity might be, 1/100th of 1% or something like that. So that's a hard one to get at. Now, one of the cases I worked with, a man was abducted and he was taken into a craft, and he saw a guy in an Army uniform with a nameplate and an MP armband, everything to identify him, working with the aliens. And he's looking at him, he's thinking, "Gee, this is military." But then he's thinking, why would the guy have an MP armband and his nameplate? This isn't making sense. As he's standing there, he can't move, scared to death, but he's trying to figure out why this man would be there in his Army uniform instead of some other way. And as he's looking at the man sort of, the shape changes, and he's a Nazi with a Nazi armband and a Nazi hat. And he realized that these images are being played into his mind. And so it's almost like the aliens thought, well, plan A tanked, let's go to plan B with a new image. So it's hard to know, but actually it's very, very rare that I run into something that suggests a military abduction. But if there is a cover-up, I believe there is, they're bound to do something to find out. I noticed there were at least 6 people here taking notes that I'm worried about in this room. But just kidding, not here. Yeah. Question?
Yes, I think the previous lady, although she asked a general question, was thinking of Leah Haley specifically.
Yeah.
She, in her general question, she didn't mention the name Leah Haley specifically. Now, when she addressed the MUFON meeting here a year or two ago, she mentioned that she tried to contact you originally when her abductions first, or experiences first started, but since you were in New York and she was in Mississippi, that someone referred her to John Carpenter.
Mm-hmm, right.
Do you know him?
Yes.
My first question is, what's your comment on the Leah Haley case?
Well, I know Leah, and I like her very much, and I certainly think that a great deal of what she's reported certainly seems genuine. I'm not sure to what extent some of this isn't alien trickery. I don't know whether it's military involvement there. I don't like to comment on cases that I haven't really looked into at least enough myself to satisfy myself. As I say, I'm keeping an open mind. But it's not something that it's a little bit like the lung case. You don't run into it very often. You really don't. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly, as I said, possible that something like this could be going on. I'm keeping an open mind, is all I can say. But I can't, I don't feel really capable of answering more specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My second question
Yeah.
is, your colleague John Mack recently passed away. Do you have any comment on his research and how you influenced each other?
We were dear friends, and he was a wonderful man, and I more or less brought him into this sad business, 1990, a date that he usually remembers and quotes when he's giving a talk. He was a fine man. And did some very valuable work. I think that one of the differences between John and myself is that John comes at his work as a psychiatrist, and I come at my work, even though therapy, de facto therapy, is extraordinarily important to me, I come at it as an investigator. And if a person comes to a psychiatrist and says they're being sexually abused by their father or something, the psychiatrist works with or they once were. The psychiatrist works with that as a reality. The psychiatrist doesn't go to that person's home, interview the neighbors, check up on whether it's actually happening or not. The psychiatrist takes that as a given and works with it. And of course, I don't do that. I try to find out, what I can in terms of going to the places where these events happened, interviewing witnesses and neighbors and so on. So our work kind of complemented itself. John also had a very hopeful attitude about the phenomenon, and the difference between us there is that I've been at this for so long, and I've seen so much pain and suffering in part of the abductees that even though I don't think of this as something that's intended by the aliens, the damage they're doing is very real psychologically. So we had a difference there. But John was an absolutely wonderful man. I had great affection for him.
If the aliens are at least as scientifically advanced as we are, they wouldn't need to go through all of this rigmarole to understand our basic DNA structure and how to do genetic manipulation of human beings. So I guess I'll express just a puzzlement why they're doing it. There doesn't seem to be, what they're doing doesn't seem to have any scientific value, or at the very least this would certainly be unnecessary from that point of view.
Well, first of all, we don't really know what their science may proceed in a way that doesn't include a lot of subtle knowledge of us. And there may be things about human psychology and human anatomy and so on that they have yet to learn, or they're trying to learn. I certainly think that the whole arena of human emotion is something that they're very interested in learning about. So I don't think we can say that because they can get here from there, or they can go become invisible and do all these things, that they necessarily know everything about human behavior, anatomy, etc. As a matter of fact, there's a great deal of evidence that would suggest that they can bollocks things up. And I mean, the many cases where people are returned from an abduction wearing somebody else's clothes, they could put the wrong clothes on people after the incident. A man I was recently working with, when he was put back on the roof of the building, and he could hardly breathe. He realized his pants were much too tight by 2 notches. And when he tried to adjust it, he found that the belt had been put in backwards, and been set in from the right instead of from the left, as if they don't really understand clothes. Well, you think, my Lord, if they have these other technologies, how can they screw up so obviously as that? But I do think those things are possible. And I don't think it's ever really works well to say they should be able to do this, and therefore, since they don't seem to be doing that, then it must not be true. It doesn't work to just kind of invent a hoop that they should be jumping through, and then if they don't seem to be jumping through it, say, well, they must not exist. And I think there's a fault in that. I've quoted this to a friend recently. One of the more embarrassing remarks that a UFO researcher once made in print. He said he didn't think that UFO occupants were extraterrestrial in nature because they're not doing what extraterrestrials would do. Now, who knows? So I just think that we have to take the data as it comes. So just on that, when I wrote Intruders, and I was dealing with and introducing to the field the idea of their trying to produce these hybrid mixes, these odd little half human, half alien creatures, and that there was this strong reproductive interest in taking sperm and ova samples, et cetera, et cetera. I was being savaged by a lot of critics who said, well, hybridization doesn't work. I mean, we can make a mule, but it's sterile and you can't do anything. So it's just impossible. They couldn't do it. But I was getting report after report after report, and I stuck with the data because what I was being opposed with was theory that this was impossible. And now, with genetic engineering, as you probably all know, and we go into this in Sight Unseen, they're able to take a gene from a salmon and insert it into a tomato plant so the tomatoes can withstand cold. Now, going from the animal kingdom to the plant kingdom, we are doing that now. If I had said something like that when I wrote Intruders, I would have been probably locked up. But the point is that our science has now moved along in a different way. We can't, and at that time people were saying, that is impossible. You can never do that. You can't produce a mixed breed. And now they're crossing goats with sheep, and Lord knows, just by moving a gene here and a gene there. So I think we have to always say practically anything is possible, and we can't say that if they can do this, they should not have to do this, whatever it is. And therefore, that's an argument against it. It really isn't an argument against it. Yeah. Question?
Yes, thank you for coming, Mr. Hopkins. My question goes back to the research, your research, and Dr. Mack's research, and I want to know: do you see any support, any interest, say in universities, say at Berkeley or at Harvard, or more liberal type universities, and among say grad students, and do you see any type of interest and support in your research in other countries, scholars of other countries such as Canada, Japan, Russia?
Boy, you're giving me a big, wide world to choose from. Those are very good questions. First of all, as was said at the beginning, one of the absolutely inescapable facts is that the public has moved to support this more and more. When I first got involved in abduction research in 1976, this is a long time ago, if you'd done a poll of UFO researchers and asked them, do you think abductions are taking place, amongst UFO researchers you might have gotten 10% that said yes. The public, you probably wouldn't have gotten 1%. But in a poll taken about 4 or 5 years ago, the question was, have we actually interacted with extraterrestrial intelligent beings? 28% said yes. A majority has accepted the reality of UFOs themselves. The support for the government cover-up and the government position has just been shrinking. We're winning this battle, but it's happening through people like you, through grassroots situations, through television, through books. And what happens is a television interview with some people who've had abduction experiences, and you look at these faces, and television is very good for letting you know who's lying to you, at least as best you can tell. I think people have been very moved, and all of the movement is in this direction. And remember, Carl Sagan at the end said the candle of rationalism is guttering out. That was his way of saying we're losing the damn war here. So even though it takes a long time to get one more person from a university, We still not getting any money. Peter Sturrock did a wonderful thing with his bringing that group together to look at the evidence. Things are happening, but very slowly, but it's steady and it's in our direction, not the other direction. I just wish it was 100 times quicker, and we wouldn't be suffering and as lonely as we are. Thanks for the question.
I wanted to ask you, Bud, about we've heard so much about abductions being at the hands of the Greys, and you were mentioning, talking about the young man that was abducted and had his lungs burned, and it was by a different type of alien. Has there more? Have there been more cases like this, or is this the only one?
Well, no, there are a lot of different types. Now, see, the problem with that man is that we haven't really looked into his experience in any depth, and it might turn out to be a little different. We don't really know. As I say, screen memories are such that it's hard to rely on what people are remembering consciously. But certainly, the typical types we get are the Greys, and then a whole range of in-betweens, which we really think are these transgenic beings that have human characteristics and alien characteristics. I think the whole history of the Men in Black phenomenon really connects with that. These are beings that don't seem to quite know how to dress or operate as if they're out of their depth. And then, of course, we get the tall insect-like beings. I always remember Carla Turner saying that her first conscious memory of an abduction was standing in the field outside the house at the age of about 5 next to something that she said was about 7 feet tall and looked like a praying mantis. She said, and it was trying to tell me it was my mother. And that's, of course, the basic tactics that they use with children. We're your real parents, you come from us, and it's an ingratiating, it's a little bit like the dirty old man that said, your mom said I'm supposed to get you in my car and take you home after school. There's something very deceptive about that. But we also get occasionally reptilian reports of things that are more scaled. Yeah. The most important thing, though, is that they usually are seen together working hand in hand. So it isn't as if you have one group doing this, another group doing that, in my experience. But there's no way to quantify that.
Okay.
Thank you. Question? We have just maybe one or two more. Just this is the end of the line here. Yeah.
Yes. Hello. I'm a practicing psychotherapist, and probably about 90-95% of my patients are schizophrenic with visual and auditory hallucinations. Some of them are claiming to have seen things and have had experiences. And I'm wondering, they're all on a lot of medication. And I'm wondering, should I pursue hypnosis with any of these individuals to determine if...
You're the professional here, and I would defer to your judgment. In my experience, if I have doubts about the person, I do not pursue it, and that could mean somebody who has severe post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. Sure. And is shaky, but I've gotten the idea that it's due to UFO experiences, and therefore that it might be helpful. But you do run into, of course, schizophrenics, and I got a long letter from a man who wanted me to know recently, this was about 3 days ago, that he is Jesus Christ, and I was that the aliens had told him that. And these are classic cases where you just thank you very much and hope that he can get some help somewhere. But I wouldn't, I don't do hypnosis if I feel a person is pretty shaky. And I think with a schizophrenic, it's a problem. So I think you're probably erring on the side of caution and health of the person.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, could you speak?
Last questions that we have. Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit more about the difference or differentiate between transgenic experiments on the parts of the aliens as opposed to hybridization?
Well, the hybrid process is when you take a sex cell from one individual and fertilize the ovum of another, whether it's plants or animals or whatever. And so you get a blend. Certainly with plants, this can be done easily. It doesn't work with humans and animals and etc. But with transgenic beings, what they're doing now is they're taking a gene from here and there and inserting it. For instance, in one case, a monkey received, the ovum for this monkey was fertilized after by another monkey, normal monkey sperm, but after they had introduced a new gene, which was a gene from a jellyfish. And the monkey glows under black light, glows green. Now, I mean, this is off the wall. This is not a true hybrid. It's a monkey, but it has extra features, you see. So the hybrid is the case where a horse and a donkey, and you get a mule. And that's very rare in the animal kingdom. But with transgenics, it's like designer plan the people the creatures they're dealing with, and of course it's a huge area of experimentation now.
Well, specific. So, are you saying that the aliens are doing transgenic work, or
that's what we think? Yeah.
Not hybridization?
We think it's genetic. Yeah, right. They could be altering both the male cell, but mostly they use the ovum to insert genes when they want to. So. I mean, we're making guesses, of course. We don't really know. When people tell you they know what's going on here, the only thing you can say that you know is what seems to be happening to human beings. If a human being says, they took me out that window and this and that happened and I was gone and my family called the police and the whole house was searched. People saw the UFO over the roof, and when I came back, I had this cut on my leg. And so you can say, well, I believe all that. That's what the person's telling you, and there's evidence for it. But as to why, how the aliens are doing it, what the final reasons are, you can only make inferences. And you make the inferences based on what we know about human anatomy, not alien anatomy. Yeah. One more question or two?
Yeah. Speaking about people going out the window, wasn't your book Witness about the Linda Napolitano incident?
Linda Cortila, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Isn't Napolitano her real name? Hasn't she come out with that? Or
no.
Nope. Okay. Sorry.
I'm not saying it's not a real name, but I'm saying that that was when the three angry skeptics were trying to attack her and me for various reasons. Long story, but I had thrown one of them out of my house during a support group meeting because he had, one of these skeptics, because he had brought a young Jewish woman who was an abductee to tears by telling her that the aliens never abducted Jews. They only took Celtics and Native Americans, some such thing. I threw this guy out and his buddy, and they started trying to attack the case with the lies.
Wasn't that one of the most extraordinary abduction events
absolutely.
of all time? I'm surprised you haven't mentioned it because it's like top of the list. And
well, it is, but I've talked about it for a long time. That happened. Actually, the first time I spoke about it was actually about 12 years ago, and my book on the subject came out now 6 years ago. So 96. More, 8 years ago. So I've just not been dealing with it, but we were talking about it during dinner, and there are new witnesses in the case, and an amazing connection with the Roman Catholic Church, which has changed the attitude of the Pope about the subject, and has led to some absolutely amazing shifts within the church hierarchy, because they know the details of this case very well.
Do you agree with Linda Moulton Howe and Eric von Daniken that there's a good chance we were actually created by aliens?
Well,
too much of a leap for you?
Okay. I mean, who knows? I mean, questions like that, you could just say those things, and we don't really know. Incidentally, for those of you, I don't know whether I should get into that or not. Okay, we have another question.
Okay, last question, Bud.
Yeah.
First of all, let me applaud you publicly for being a pioneer. We recognize historically that's not a good position to be in usually, so we applaud you.
Thank you.
My question deals with people who are starting to have memories that they're not certain about, and the question of exploring those. Do you find that when memories start cascading in and they come to someone like yourself and start exploring that, does their life typically improve with these breakthroughs in memory, or does it seem to get kind of muddled for a while? And how does it progress?
Well, it's obviously everybody's different, and it affects different people differently. First of all, my basic rule of thumb is I don't work with somebody unless, first I have to believe that they're essentially sound and that they have some kind of safety net at home, friends, relatives, a therapist, somebody they can deal with. But the second thing is I don't get into the case unless it seems to me, it's just my reading of it, that their life is being impinged upon by the experiences and narrowed. And of course with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, you can have a lot of problems. People don't sleep, they have flashbacks, and they're not living up to their potential in lots of ways. And in those cases, I really want to work with a person to help them. Now, as to what the short-term outcome is, sometimes people can be tremendously confused, doubtful, tremendously excited, up and down. One man I worked with years ago, after we first looked into some things, and we left, actually somebody else was doing hypnosis at the time. I spent 7 years sitting in on other people. I had the longest internship in hypnosis in history, I think. But anyway, when he left, he was absolutely, happy, and he said, oh, now I know it's all, fits together. Now I understand why I did this, why I did that. And within 10 minutes, he said, I think I made it all up. This just didn't happen. I must have made it all up. And I think I made it up. And he went on about that. And we were sitting having a coffee, and he was talking, and he said, I'm sure I made it up. And then he stood up, and he went like this, and then like this. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, the table was this high, but they didn't see more than this high, but they seemed to be looking down at me. And I said, I thought this didn't happen. And he said, it happened. So here we go, within 10 minutes. And of course, that's why the safety net at home, to connect with other people who had the experiences and all this, can be very helpful. It's certainly not going to necessarily just immediately clarify everything, and there's a very big, damned if you do, damned if you don't situation here. So it's a very difficult call. And I'm often relieved when the person doesn't want to look into it, because I think, let's work for Dad here, or whatever. But I do think that in so many cases it's just been so helpful to a person, because the first thing they understand is, I'm not crazy, I'm not nuts, this really happened. And then they will say something like, gee, those weird things I used to do, I used to think I was so crazy, but now I know why I did them. Like one woman I worked with, after it was over, the first session, the figures had come through the window. She said, Bud, this is such a relief. She said, I never knew why I did it, but wherever I lived, even if it's on the 3rd floor, I would nail my windows shut. And my boyfriend would say, can't we get some air in here? What's the matter? She said, I didn't know why I was doing it. And she said, now I know, and I don't seem so nutty to myself. And just to release that kind of self-doubt and so on can be tremendously helpful. But it certainly has you're opening a Pandora's box too. So it's a complicated thing. Well, now, just one last thing. I have back at my table, I have a few artworks, collages, and a couple of drawings to show you what I do, because I never like to just be represented by the UFO work, and I have some copies of the new book. So, but again, I want to thank everybody. You've been wonderful, and thanks for Sandra and everybody for bringing me here. Thank you.